It may be the world's best known song, but I wonder, when was the last time you really listened to its message?
Welcome to the podcast. Here's your host, Craig T. Owens.
John Newton wrote the hymn Amazing Grace, and it has been called the world's best known song. It certainly has been translated into more languages than any other song, and there's been more artists that have arranged it and recorded it than any other song. But there's a danger when a song is that familiar that we can hear the lyrics, we can listen to them, we can sing along with them, and yet we miss the rich meaning that's there. You know, that word amazing, that adjective at the beginning of grace, is really the only one that works there. Our language almost fails us trying to comprehend how awesome this grace is that God wants to extend to us. There's a story that Jesus tells about grace. We have called it the story of the prodigal son. But in this 15th chapter of Luke's gospel, I think that Jesus might call it the story of the lost sons because of the two stories that he told before that. And I did say lost sons, plural. I'll explain in just a second. If you don't know the story, it basically goes like this. The younger son says to his father, I want my share of the inheritance now. Well, when do you normally get the inheritance? When your father dies. He's really saying, I don't want you in my life anymore. I want to call my own shots. And so the father gives him that portion of the money. He leaves and he wastes all the money. He finds himself penniless, friendless, and he hires himself out as a slave, a pig farmer. And while he's sitting there, I love Jesus uses this phrase. He says, the younger son came to his senses. And he realized, my father's servants have it better off than I have right now. And so he rehearses a speech that he's going to give to his father, and he heads home. His father sees him from the distance, and he runs towards him. The son starts his speech. He says, Father, I've sinned against you. I'm not even worthy to be called your son. And that's as far as he gets. The father just envelops him in a hug. And he begins to call his servants and says, we're going to have a party. We're going to celebrate because my son that was dead is now alive. My son that was lost is now found. And they start having this party. The older brother is out in the fields working. And as he comes towards the house, he hears the noise of the party. And he finds out that his younger brother has come back. And that's why they're celebrating. And he refuses to go inside. So the father comes out to talk to him and says, why aren't you coming inside? He says, I've been working for you. You never gave me a party. And yet this kid went off and wasted all your money. And now you're celebrating that he's come back. And the father says, son, you always have me. And all of the stuff that I have, all the resources that I have, you have access to those as well. But we're celebrating because your son that was dead is now alive. Your son that was lost is now found. As I was reading that story, I looked at a commentary, a couple of notes by Dr. Henry Halley, and he said something about these boys that I hadn't considered before. He noted this: interestingly, both brothers underestimate their father's love and grace. What is amazing about grace is that it is always more than we expect or deserve. And this is why I call it the story of the lost sons, because both of them lost the full meaning of their father's grace. See, the younger son thought that because he had blown it, that he wasn't even worthy to be called a son anymore. That was part of his speech. When he was rehearsing the speech, he was going to say, I'm not worthy to be called your son. Will you just accept me as one of your slaves? No, he did well by confessing his sin. That was the first thing that he said to his father. I have sinned. But he underestimated his father's grace towards him in thinking that now somehow he was a second-class citizen. That happens to a lot of us too. We blow it, and the devil loves to whisper to us that we've fallen out of favor with God, that we're not really worthy to come back, that maybe we can't even receive full forgiveness. But what about the older son? Here's what I find interesting. The younger son went out and he was acting like a slave. He was working as a slave and didn't think that he was a son anymore. And the older son who stayed home, that exact same thing happened. The phrase that he uses when he comes to his father, he says, all of my life I've been slaving in my work for you. He didn't see himself as a son either. He was working hard trying to earn his father's acceptance. And what does his father say to him? You don't have to try to earn that. You always have it. He said, you always have me and you always have my resources. I also love the fact that this story doesn't have a therefore they all lived happily ever after ending. Jesus just ends the story without us seeing the conclusion, because then really we can put ourselves into that story. Because I think that sometimes that's the two lies that the devil will tell us, is that we've messed up and we're not worthy of God's grace, or we haven't worked hard enough to be able to earn God's grace. But that's the amazing thing about God's grace, is that it is undeserved. He gives it to us just because he is God. There is absolutely nothing you can do that is going to make God love you any less than he already does. There's nothing you could do that would make God love you more than he already does. God already loves you to an infinite degree. It can't be diminished. It can't be increased. You just get to enjoy. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Friend, I pray that God would open your eyes if you've been blinded to his grace and allow you to see just how amazing his grace is.
Contact Craig and keep up with his blog posts, books, and other videos at craigtowens.com.